Welcome to Global Insights, and I just returned from London, and I'm sitting in Cambridge with a very famous demographer, Dr. Daniel Staetsky,
Good to see you, Alex.
from Institute for Jewish Policy Research. And I just witnessed in London many demonstrations, pro-Palestinian demonstrations, especially on weekend. My natural question is, demonstrations, of course, affect everyone, and they create impression that most of the people support Palestinian case. In this support Palestinian case. But statistics. What indeed is the British citizen think on this?
Well, that's a great question. Very well placed. When we watch television or social media, this informs and disinforms at the same time. And what can we say looking objectively at the numbers? So there's a tradition in Britain and other Western countries where every single issue that's important enough for the public somehow makes it into public opinion polls. These polls now are very easy to conduct. There are large panels of respondents that support this kind of industry. So every time something important happens, really, and a variety of polling companies in Britain conduct a poll of public opinion. And not only that, significant conflicts, significant social issues have been followed for a while. So for some issues, you can build up a picture of what's happening today, but also what people thought, let's say, to the 90s. And Israel and Palestine and Israel-Arab conflict is one such issue. You can really track it for a long time. So for a while now, one question that has been asked in the public opinion polls it's a very simple question if you think about it. It's not about Jews, by the way. It's specifically about the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. People were asked by YouGov, for example, this is one of the British pollsters, who do you sympathize more? Do you sympathize with Israelis or Israel? Do you sympathize with the Palestinians? Can you answer that question? Are you neutral? You sympathize with both sides? And I would say that if I have to produce a bombastic statement about what's actually going on, I would say that most of the British public is either completely indifferent or supports, as they put it, both sides. So they look at the conflict and actually they can't decide, they won't decide, maybe they don't know enough. That's the way for them to formulate that. And there's a significant group who say we just don't know. We really don't. Now, how significant is that? In the olden days, which is the olden days for us is anything that happened before the 7th of October, that would be about 50%, something like this. So a significant chunk, maybe even more, 60% of people. Then there are people who have a position. They have something to say. And the interesting thing about them that there are two groups. You can say there are two margins. About, again, in the olden days, which is before the 7th of October, about 10 to 15% sympathized with Israel. Very clearly, they were prepared to say that. What about the Palestinians? About 20%. So 2 times higher in percentage terms. The interesting development about this is a development that we have seen on the 7th of October and for a short while afterwards. On the 7th of October, something very significant happened that never happened before. That the level of sympathy with Israel went up, and very, very significantly. The levels of sympathy with the Palestinians went down somewhat. That situation continued for several months. So if you look at the figures probably in November, and the 7th of November, 7th of December, that was the situation. So what was the initial reaction of the British public? They suddenly, or significant percentage, suddenly saw the Israel's point.
Yeah, so that was before Israel retaliated.
That's right, yes. Before the full-scale war arguably started. What happened since then? Things returned to the initial point. They're not significantly worse, they're not significantly better than they were before the 7th of October. So they converged again. The levels of support, or you can say sympathy towards Israel is now where they were at approximately 10-15%. They're slightly higher than they were with the Palestinians, but really I wouldn't overinterpret or overstate that. We are now where we were before, in the olden days, so to speak. So nothing significant changed in that particular period. One thing to add is that the people who identified as supporters of Conservative Party behaved in that sense quite differently from those who identified with the Labour Party. And we know that from European politics, we also know it from British politics. That's true, that's also something that is seen in the data. Labour supporters have very low levels of sympathy with Israel, and not much changed there, 7th of October or not. With the Conservative supporters, there was some increase in support of in understanding and sympathy towards Israelis, but these levels also have gone down. Still, the gap between them, between the Labour and the Conservatives, is significant. That's the reality, and we also see it in other European locations.
Without making any scientific research on the subject, but just being among the demonstrators in London, you notice that the large portion, I would say 50-60%, I would say coming from the ethnic minorities in the Britain, and maybe less than a half the original British population. With regard to that, what is the tendency currently?
So the fact that you saw many foreigners in London, demonstration or not, shouldn't surprise anyone. So in 2021, which is only a few years ago, there was a census of population in Britain, and in that census, the British census asks in a very detailed way about people's ethnic origins, religious origins, where they were born, etc., when they came to Britain, so to document the phenomenon of migration. When we look at this data, which is very fresh, it tells us that the proportion of people who were born outside of Britain is 16%. 16 is a number that needs to be framed somehow, so that you need a context. You don't know really whether it's a lot or a little. And to provide that context, one thing that needs to be remembered is this. I'd say 20, 30 years, whenever we went to the university, whenever anyone of our age would go to the university and study any course in sociology, let's say in political science, there would be a particular term used then, migration countries. So that term related to the United States of America, Canada, Australia, those countries that were created, that came into being, so to speak, as a result of large-scale migration from Europe there. So Europe experienced some sort of demographic pressure, which caused the European population spread into those areas, and migration countries, migration states were created. So with this knowledge now, if we approach, for example, the American census, we ask, okay, so what's the proportion of migrants then in America today? The number, or the proportion is 13%. 13% in America, 16% in Britain. 13, 16. So without us looking, or anyone in particular paying attention, in the meantime, England, or Britain, became a country of migrants. It used to export people, now it imports people, and it rivals, not rivals, it's sort of outdid in the meantime the United States of America. The situation in England, the data that I brought is not unique. If you go to Austria, the situation, for example, Austria, or Germany, or France, the situation is no different. Not only that, you've been in London. London is different from Britain as a whole. 16% describe the situation in Britain. In London, the proportion of foreigners will be higher, and you will see them very well represented. That's what you will see, demonstrations or not.
Dr. Daniel Staetsky, thank you very much.
My pleasure is mine.
Guys, stay tuned on Global Insights for more.